And along with your review, is there heat played to cost effectiveness too? In other words, to contain cost overruns and
We're taking a
staffing
holistic
ratios being.
Oh, absolutely, yes, sir. We're taking a holistic approach. We've recognized the vacancies, and we're realizing the need. We're also realizing that there's a cost associated with all of this, and we're trying to be smart about it so that we can soften that transition. But we are going to be faced with having to deal with making some decisions in the future.
Senator Allen, did you have any inquiries you'd like to make from the West LA home a little bit to this group?
Well, sure. I guess would just ask to, if there's anything specific to the home that I should be aware of in conjunction, with some of the challenges and concerns there.
I can tell you that for the longest time we had, we were struggling with getting the construction started, and as you know, it has started, and we're getting nothing but positive and glowing comments and reports back on that. We were able to get certified both from the CDPH and USDVA, which has allowed us to open up a second skilled nursing facility, which was a huge step for us. Our plans as it currently lies is that we will, around the same time frame that we're opening up the kitchen and getting that license, we'll open up our third skilled nursing facility. And about this time next year, we'll be opening up our fourth, which will, minus the one left memory care unit, we will be at near max capacity. So I think we've put the right people in place. As the Secretary mentioned, we're focusing on standardizing practices and continuing to build the foundation. And I think that West LA is really really doing well, and the momentum is contagious.
I mean, do you think that's shared by some of the activists, that sentiment?
Well, what we're doing is we're reaching out to everybody that we can. We're inviting folks to come visit the home. You yourself, I'm sure, have seen the home, and it is a tremendous facility.
Yeah.
You talk to the residents and the staff, and they are just thrilled to be there. We recently held a job fair, which was intended to help source our second skilled nursing facility, and 800 people showed up. So I think there's clearly energy behind folks wanting to work on that campus and take care of our veterans. So I do believe that we are cresting the wave and we're moving forward.
And I'd love to just hear about some of the challenges and but also positive lessons learned from working with the Federal Department of Veterans Affairs. I mean, I think a lot of people don't always understand the different roles of the state and the feds in this area. Obviously, there's a great deal of confluence. The feds, of course, have had some major challenges recently. How can you give us sort of if you were at a cocktail party, and someone was asking you about the state and federal roles in this and how well you guys work together on housing, how would you answer? How would you answer that person?
That's a fair question. We do share an agreement with the federal Department of Veterans Affairs with the THP program, with their transitional housing program, which has created an opportunity to work with them directly on a daily basis. And I will tell you that we've received nothing but great support in working with our transitional housing program. They are very open to ideas and supporting those wraparound services that were drafted in the sharing agreements. I would tell you that they've invited us several times, both myself, the Secretary, and other staff members, to their transitional planning for their future. The West Los Angeles campus is going to go through a transformation in the next few years where they're going to try to improve upon that, and we've always been invited to the table. I think that we have a great relationship right now with at least at that level, with how we deal with them on a daily basis, and I have absolutely no complaints with how anything that we've asked from them or anything that they've asked from us. So at the cocktail party, I would be arm in arm with my federal VA brother.
Oh, there you go.
One team.
Who would the veterans kind of count on as at a given home as their advocate? I'm a big advocate of advocacy, and I don't mean here in the legislature. I mean for an individual patient, for example, that we all need help. I self-appointed myself advocate for my own health because I found out I can't trust everybody. And what would one of your residents do if they were having some difficulty? Would any kind of healthcare delivery? Where would they go to see if that could be addressed?
Well, one of the things that we found is that our veterans are very receptive to open door policies. They're very receptive to us listening to them. I've participated in numerous town hall events in most of the homes, and at the individual level, they would reach out to the administrator, to members of the staff. They have allied councils which support many of their shared concerns. They are not afraid to contact us at the headquarters directly, and we are not afraid to respond directly back to them. I think one of the biggest things that we've learned over the year that I've been here is that it's very important that we communicate, and they need to know that they can talk to headquarters and the staff and the administrators in their home, and that they have a voice. We do, the Undersecretary and myself, do all we can with making sure that they understand that we are there for them. The reason we are here is to support them I mean, this is their final place to live, and our job is to make their life as comfortable and as relevant as possible. So there's many folks along that chain, Senator, that they can reach out to.
And is there anything like a hotline too that you utilize?
Well, they have access to the headquarters. They definitely have reached out via, I'm not so sure in the sense of hotline, but in every home we have suggestion box, comments box, and on a regular basis they share that with us. And so I don't know that a veteran has ever felt that they have not had an opportunity to reach out to folks even outside their building. But I'll take a hard look at that hotline.
Well,
see if we can
think
implement something
the
if it doesn't
communication
currently
is
exist.
important. You know, I have a great frustration with how technology has now been employed, and for example, I'm carrying some legislation to address that right now, where we're going to be expanding beyond DMV a callback feature. In other words, if you're on hold and you don't stay on hold for half an hour or an hour, my wife and I have been on for over an hour.
Sure.
And you can opt out, and then you'll get a call back. Is anything like that in place for people who get frustrated by, reaching you by some means?
I can tell you that we have received reports from folks that have shared that same concern, that themselves or family members have tried to reach out to headquarters or to the homes themselves and have been placed on hold, and nobody has gotten back to them. And I can tell you that we work really hard on a daily basis to remind staff members why they're there. And so every time that has ever surfaced to myself or the Undersecretary's level, we take immediate action. And I can tell you that it is something that we reinforce every chance we get with the staff and with the residents, so that they understand that we do care about them, and that their voice matters. And sometimes there's some that are more vocal than others, but their voice still matters.
Well, that personal touch is the hominess, the familial kind of relationship that I think our veterans truly value. Kind of a funny story on that end. Years ago, I was having trouble communicating myself as a senator on behalf of a constituent with CalVet, to the extent that I had a sergeant of arms go over to the headquarters, I don't even remember where it was then, and stand at a desk to make sure somebody was sitting at that desk for me to call so I could talk to a human being. And then I had this brilliant idea to put in legislation that required agency of government to answer the phone within 7 rings. And then I got outsmarted because that kick-started the answering machine business, and those folks made a lot of money, they told me, at a different organization, because answering services became a big deal. And it all started with CalVet. So I'm kind of sensitive to this particular situation. I think all Americans are frustrated to varying degrees with their government in that regard, and I appreciate your personal attention to it.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. And Deputy Secretary Gunn, you mentioned some pretty substantial increase in the application for the loans. Are you attributing that to veterans being more comfortable with the process, or are their opportunity to secure loans, or are their lives getting a little bit better so they can anticipate buying homes? Is that part of it too?
Yes, a good part of it is the recovery of the marketplace from the housing crash. And so people are now getting back on their feet and being able to get out and try and buy homes. And during 12-13, while the market was recovering a little, it wasn't recovered enough for individual buyers to buy homes. They were oftentimes being outbid by investors who were trying to get properties for their portfolios at rock bottom prices. So as the housing market continues to recover, and with our processes that we've put in place to enable us to be very competitive with our interest rates, all of that's going to make a difference to the veterans, and we're reaching out, we're educating realtors and brokers to come to CalVet. They lost sight of us for a little while, and we're re-engaging there.
I think that's an important point, not just to the veterans, but to communicate with the realtors too, and the investors.
Right.
I expect that enhances their confidence too, and willingness to invest and to participate in the home loan program. All right. Anything else that you'd like to offer for us there?
Anything else?
No, I'm good.
We certainly very much appreciate your coming and being with us today. Allow me, if I may, I see a friend of mine sitting back there, Mark Johannesson. He's variously been mayor, councilman, vice mayor, and he's son of Senator Maurice Johannesson, a longtime friend of mine who was the chairman of this committee and architect of the expansion not only to the Reading Veterans Home, but many others. Mark, would you wish to come up and comment a little bit with us? Mark is now, it's called the Senate Committee on Cost Control, that he is the chair, or is it executive officer of? Chair, right?
Chairman, yes, the chair.
All right, well, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. I was expecting Jose Vieira, who's from UCLA, to go into details of this report. And so essentially, for those of you who don't know what the commission is, the Cost Control Commission is the only commission with authority that deals with the cost control and creating efficiencies within state government. And so it's comprised of about up to 27 commissioners, all volunteers. And until last month, we actually had an executive director who retired on medical leave. And for those of you who have run offices and have lost their executive assistant, you'll know what the commission is scrambling a little bit now.
That's problematic, yes, sir.
That's problematic. The commission over the last, since about 2010, has engaged higher education to look at different state operations for efficiencies using academic research to make recommendations and a plan to improve efficiencies. We work with the Anderson School of Management, which is what this the Harvard Kennedy School of Public Policy, UC Berkeley Haas School, which is the who did this actual report on the marketing plan for the Veterans Administration, CalVet, and UC Berkeley, or USC Price School of Public Policy, and California State University School of Business in Sacramento. So would the chair want to go over the report that the?
If you could summarize it just a little bit.
Sure.
We're going to get next into the cemeteries, and that's a big issue with your father.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, I thought this would be an appropriate preface to that, and if you could just summarize for us.
Sure. So basically, as you've heard testimony before, there's roughly 2 million veterans in California. So what this report does is looks how to outreach to the 50% of the veterans that Veterans Administration knows about and the 50% they don't. And they came up with a 4-part strategy on how to better market, to basically market their services to the vets of all either known or unknown. So one is a social media aspect of it to really create a situation where they're hitting all the channels to outreach as much as they can to the different veterans. And of course, veterans age in the groups from the current veterans to veterans that have been around. There's also a suggestion of an organizational change, which we basically, there's now a Deputy Secretary of Communication and Legislative Affairs, and the recommendation is to split that so you have basically a secretary, a deputy secretary of communications, and a secretary of legislative affairs. And the reason is because communication is important throughout the context of what the Haas School felt is needed to actually do the effective outreach. There's also recommendation on the county veteran service organizations on better coordinating, because as you know, those are all county by county, and there's an issue of consistency in messaging and consistency of communication. And finally, the partnerships that could be developed either through the federal organizations or other NGOs to actually come together on these on the marketing plans. So in essence, that was the global recommendations. They have implementation steps that they feel that that could be implemented to get that point. And so the cost benefit of this particular type of project would be, to the extent you can outreach to more veterans, increase the benefits of more veterans, then those veterans are going to spend the money in the economy. And the economy, it's actually going to be an economic development driver. So in essence, that's in a nutshell what the report is about.
All right. Senator Allen, any questions of Mayor or what are you, Councilman, Mayor? What's your
I
status now,
am
Mark?
currently on City Council in West Sacramento.
All right. Well, he's served in many capacities. Senator Allen.
I just want to compliment him on the very impressive beard.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Hopefully I'll be able to get there too, so thank you.
Well, thank you for being here with us today, Mr. Johannesson, and please give your regards to my friend, your father. I run into him often, and thank him on all of our behalf for his dedication through the years to the veterans. I mean, he still gets acknowledged all the time, and I know he's never forgotten, and he's still working hard for veterans as you are. It's nice he's passed the torch on to you, and you're helping too.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Senators. Thanks for inviting
being
me.
here.
Thank you.
You bet. All right, if we would, please have the next panel come forward. Keith Boylan, and he is the Deputy Secretary of Veteran Services, and Angela Yamamoto, Chief of Operations. And Mr. Boylan, thank you for coming back with us together.
Sure, Senator.
And Mr. Yamamoto, we appreciate your being with us here today, too. And if you please go ahead and talk a little bit about the cemeteries and how we're doing getting these cemeteries moving along and maintaining them.
Sure, and thanks, Senator Nielsen, and thanks members of the committee for having us here today, giving us the opportunity to talk about vet services. As you know, the next panel is vet services, so cemeteries fall into that, but so I won't go into the strategic plan side of it, but just basically an update on what's taking place up in your area and then throughout the state as well. Most recently, we had a groundbreaking down in Fort Ord for the new cemetery down there on the old Fort Ord Army base. Really exciting process, been going on for quite some time, and fortunately in this past 18 months we were able to put that through and finally get that whole issue resolved and get the groundbreaking going and get construction started. So we're looking at completion of construction in July of 2016. So that's very excited, a lot of support from the community down there. It's been an effort that's been ongoing for my predecessor's predecessors. So we're very proud of that accomplishment and happy to do that for the folks in Monterey with such a rich military history. Another opportunity is taking place currently down in El Toro in Orange County. We're in the initial stages of doing some analysis. DGS has already started the work at the site down there to see what are the possibilities of developing a state cemetery on that site. The initial analysis will give us some idea of the cost and so forth associated with some of the remediation that would need to take place down at that facility. So that's ongoing. Once again, strong community support down there for that effort. And then, of course, we have the Igo Cemetery. Igo was our first, well, Yountville was the first, but the first that we built, developed, staffed, and so forth. And obviously, we were kind of new to the cemetery business at that point. And that was the central focus. And that cemetery, we were fortunate enough to bring in somebody who had run the Riverside National Cemetery. And he developed that over the years into a remarkable site. And the folks in the community up there are obviously very engaged and very proud of that site. Currently, we're in the process of developing when it first started, with just having the one kind of active, Yountville is active in sort, but only for columbarian use. So Igo is a much more active cemetery. So there was some of the community there wanted to develop the memorials and monuments and so forth. And with the other cemeteries coming online, we kind of went back and looked through the regs and realized that it was time to really codify some of the processes and procedures that were taking place up there. So as you're very familiar with some of the issues surrounding the memorials and monuments. So according to the Military and Veterans Code and We've developed the regulations. We've worked very close with OAL over these past few weeks and/or months to develop that. They're being internally routed through the department now and should be going over to OAL around the end of the week. And then we'll be looking at a public hearing date mid-July-ish for that. It'll be set depending on the date we actually provide it to OAL. And so that'll be great because it'll really shore up some of the policies and procedures around that. Obviously, the folks up there are very passionate about that cemetery and have a lot of ideas on how they'd like to see it grow. So we want to make sure we have something in place that kind of governs that process and provides some direction to move forward consistently, and not only for that cemetery, but for the others that we're developing as well.
Well, I've appreciated your communication and access for me, as we've had some of the veterans voice some concerns up there. And one, a good friend of mine, Lieutenant Colonel Stiglitz, and he's worked hard on behalf of the veterans there, as of course had Senator Johanneson. But I think the outgrowth of that and the seasoning and maturing is what you're talking about here now, the kind of a more standard policy so everybody knows and know what they do expect, and certainly with the placing of monuments is extremely important. So thank you for being a part of it here with us today. Angela Yamamoto, please. You have some things to add.
Just to add to Mr. Stiglitz, he's been very responsive, and I feel like we have established a good relationship. We're actively working with him to get through his proposal, and we've approved them to move forward with their construction, so he's happy. But I do feel like we're definitely moving forward out there in a good direction, and the regulations will definitely help also.
Well, I was just kind of fondly acknowledging a friend up there, you know. I must sort of wistfully say that, you know, if you've not been at the Igo Cemetery on a kind of stormy, but where the storm is breaking, early spring day, and you're looking back over the yellow bollies and there's snow caressing all of those peaks to the west, and the serenity and beauty of that place. It literally is a holy place. And to know that our veterans are resting there is such a comfort. It's got to be to their families. I have no loved one that's at that particular cemetery, but it's a unique place. All of the veteran cemeteries will have their special qualities, as did Yountville. It was a historic one. I was privileged to represent it, and it goes way back to the late 1800s. But that Igo one is very special. So, Senator Allen, any questions of these folks?
I guess I don't know that I know very much about, once again, kind of following on my last question about federal and state. I don't know that I kind of understand the relationship between the federal veteran cemeteries and the state cemeteries, and how that relationship works. Who gets jurisdiction over what? You know, when is it determined? When you guys do one rather than the feds? I just gonna love to get a better sense. I'm sorry for the elementary question. But.
Sure, no, that's not a problem. It's those decisions are made due to population and distance from a national cemetery. The National Cemetery Program tries to provide burial service, memorial service to veterans throughout the country. There are areas where they don't have reasonable access. So the federal program works with the states and provides them funding for the development of a state cemetery. Now, the National Cemetery...
It becomes a shared cost model?
Well, it somewhat.
Or they pay for most of it?
The National Cemetery Administration pays for a good portion of it. Then they have what's called unreimbursable costs. That, you know, for instance, down in Fort Ord, there was some specific environmental stuff that was due to unexploded ordnance and various other California regulations, some DGS-related fees and so forth that the feds don't feel is their responsibility. So those would fall under unreimbursed costs. But for the most part, just a ballpark number, usually around 80 to 85% of the total cemetery cost for development is covered from the National Cemetery Administration. And then the state is required to, or the community is required to come up with the other 15 or so percent.
Are there rules and requirements as to aesthetics or some certain uniformity? I I mean, are all the tombstones the exact same as
They're
in
very
Arlington or-
strict, and those are some of the challenges we have, and that's kind of why. And back to your previous question, though, also the maintenance moving forward is a state responsibility. There are some costs that are offset from reimbursements through the VA for folks that are buried. There's burial fees, which reimburse some of the costs of operation and maintenance. And then to your other point, the National Cemetery Administration has very strict guidelines in terms of how a military cemetery should look and be maintained. And those are some of the reasons, you know, and Senator Danielson talked about that, the glorious view up there, and that's something we're very particular about protecting. And that's why it's very important to put these regulations through now before the development of some of the memorials and monuments that were in the queue, so to speak. So, and then there's also the regs in terms of where they face, what that can be adorned. We do have some challenges up there because folks don't understand. I mean, cemeteries, oftentimes people leave teddy bears or various other objects for loved ones. And unfortunately, according to NCA standards, that is not allowed. So it puts us in a tough situation with folks up there because you want to be sensitive to those needs and their feelings and so forth. They're also very particular about the way the burials take place. And we have folks from variety of different cultures up there that may have some burial traditions that they want acknowledged during the process, so that can often be a difficult day. But our staff up there is very sensitive to all that and usually tries to mitigate whatever issues and find some resolve.
How many state cemeteries are there? State veteran cemeteries?
Throughout the country,
No, in California.
3,
Where are
with one perhaps. Igo, Yountville, it's on the ground of the Yountville home, and then at Fort Ord in Monterey.
And Igo is where?
Right outside of Reading, I'm sorry. It's
Right
about
outside
8 miles west of Reading, I'd say,
You know, west and south.
west and south,
Then
yeah.
how many, and federal cemeteries? I know we've got one down in West LA, but do you know-
Sacramento, we have right here in Dixon,
Uh-huh.
Sacramento National Cemetery. One in the valley, that's why the Monterey one was so difficult, because they built the federal one on the other side of the mountains. So they argued for years that the National Cemetery Administration had a requirement that it had to be a certain distance, and as the crow flies, Monterey was too close. But after much argument back and forth, and you actually drive that process, it's much longer because you got to kind of go up and around. And you know, we have no input in terms of where the feds decide to put in their cemeteries. For instance, El Toro, that's not too far from the riverside, but you could argue that if you are a 75-year-old widow and you want to go see your husband, and it may be only 18 miles away, but in LA traffic will take you, you know, the better part of a day to get there back and forth. We can argue that as well. So there is some flexibility in terms of that distance requirement and so forth, and the VA kind of takes each of those issues, and it also depends on, obviously, the argument that you present.
So families have to kind of fight to be able to get, I mean, how does it work? I mean, a family requests a certain cemetery and then it's typically granted.
Oh, yeah.
Is there any
long as there's
challenge?
I mean, Arlington, those kind of cemeteries are obviously tough, but for the most part, assuming there's space, it's on a first come, first served basis.
And you just have to have been a veteran of any of the branches, including Coast Guard,
Yes.
Merchant Marine.
Yes. And spouses and dependents can be buried there as well in the state cemetery program.
Okay, all right. And then do you guys also control military monuments? Obviously within the context of the cemetery, but sort of beyond that, I don't know, like a battlefield marker or those kinds of things? Is that under your purview?
Calvet, yes.
But
yes.
specifically,
Located at the state cemeteries, yes.
ones at the cemeteries, right?
Well, those at the state parks as well. For instance, I mean, JP.
Like San
probably
Pasquale, I mean,
no, not too much. Like Secretary Villarreal will be able to talk, Deputy Secretary Villarreal will be able to talk about it. She's currently working on the Mexican-American Memorial. She can give you a little background on Calvet's role in that process when she comes up next.
Okay.
But we do have a role in military monuments in other places in the cemetery as well.
interesting, okay. Yeah,
And around that one's a big deal. That Mexican-American one's an older one. It's right across the street from the Capitol, and been a real desire to upgrade and protect that a little bit.
oh, the one over here by the,
Right across.
yeah, I've seen it. Yeah.
Exactly. I'm sure she'll provide an update today because I believe that's moving along quite well.
All right, we'll move on to the next section. Deputy Secretary Boylan, if you'd remain with us. And,
Sure.
Chief Yamamoto, thank you so much for your courtesy being with us here today. For this section, Mr. Boylan is joined by Lindsay Sin, Deputy Secretary, Women's Veterans Affairs, and Mirtha Villarreal Younger, Deputy Secretary, Minority Affairs. Mr. Boylan, would you like to commence?
Sure. I will jump right into it. In terms of our strategic plan, the enterprise goal of increasing the accessibility and utilization of benefits and services through advocacy and education really falls in the wheelhouse of Vet Services Division. As you know, Vet Services Division is responsible for the claims and appeals throughout the state of veterans who file using a CalVet power of attorney. And obviously work closely with our CVSOs, who are our boots on the ground partner in filing most of those claims. We also run the Disabled Veteran Business Enterprise Program, the outreach portion of that, in collaboration with DGS. We oversee the outreach for veterans throughout the state, which are local interagency network coordinators and a variety of other efforts. The mental health program, stand down program, and then of course the state cemeteries. When we sat down, when I came on, fortunately I came on kind of right as this plan was being developed, and I was able to kind of put Vet Services stamp on our portion of it at least. And the concept that we came up with was the concept of contact, connect, and communicate with veterans. So initially, the biggest challenge we have is with the 2 million veterans throughout the state is that initial contact. Unfortunately, there's not a clean handoff from the Department of Defense to the Department of Veterans Affairs, nor the State Department of Veterans Affairs when service members leave the military. So it's always a challenge for us. We are always playing catch up when they come back to the state. We have to really try to get out there and identify where they're at. We do receive information in terms of their DD-214 sometime after they return, which has a HOMA record on, which we can follow up, but that's a physical address that we have to snail mail information to and hope we get a response. That's kind of the initial pull. So we realized we needed to develop a variety of strategies in terms of how to go about contacting vets. And then the next was, once we contact them, how do we effectively connect them to all the benefits and services that they've earned through their service to our country? Then after that, how do we continue to communicate? Once we get them connected to their benefits, how does CalVet, what role do we play in their life? You know, I learned when I was 22 and a veteran, it's very different than being 45 and married and 2 kids and being a veteran. Your needs change. Everything changes. Benefits available to you change based on all the status changes and so forth as well. So being a veteran is truly an evolving process. So it's very important that at CalVet we recognize that, and we want to provide a system which we came up with our new website called MyCalVet. We want to make sure that folks understand at what stage in their life they're at and what we can offer them at that time. And as they move along, how does CalVet pertain to them? What is relevant about CalVet for them? And we've kind of tried to focus all of our services and programs on that concept, which I think has been very effective. In the contact arena, some of our original goals were of the expand and improve methods of identifying and contacting veterans. One of our metrics was increasing the number of veterans in our CalVet database. In 2012-13, when I started at CalVet, we had 67,949 folks in our database. By the end of 2013-14, we had 635,000, so an 835,000 veteran increase. Now, one big portion of this, I mean, I'd love to take complete credit for that, but unfortunately I can't. But seriously, we were in the process of changing to a digital case management system called VetPro, which allowed the CVSOs the ability to take all of their paper files and put them in digital form, so we would have a digital case management system that we could access all the work they do and properly distribute the subvention funding and having a mechanism to gather all that.